recording? I'm not going to record this. Welcome, everybody. I hope it's warming up where everybody is. It's been ridiculous here. We'll get started in just a few minutes, give a few more people time to come in. But welcome, everyone, to our second ARCE-MO event. We are really excited about this one. We were excited about our first one. We're excited about all of them, but we think it's going to be pretty good. All right. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to the president of our ARCE-MO chapter, Stacy Davidson, and she is going to do some introduction.
Thank you very much, Kate. Welcome ARCE-MO members and guests. My name is Stacy Davidson and I'm the president of ARCE Missouri. It is my pleasure to welcome you today. ARCE Missouri is the newest chapter of the American Research Center in Egypt. We officially launched in April 2020 during the global pandemic with the mission of celebrating and sharing the culture and history of Egypt from the ancient through Islamic periods with Missouri and its neighboring communities. We are pleased that our virtual events are able to expand our programming beyond those geographic areas, and we welcome our national and international attendees to our event. ARCE Missouri's mission is outreach and education. We also strive to provide a community in which institutions, professionals in the field, and non-professionals of all ages can share their knowledge, interest, and love of Egypt. You can stay up to date with ARCE Missouri news and events by following us on Facebook, Twitter, or by accessing our website at arcemo.org. Although both ARCE National and ARCE Missouri provide free public outreach events, some lectures, workshops, and benefits are restricted to ARCE members. If you enjoy ARCE Missouri programming and would like to be more involved in our organization, visit arce.org/membership. You can see all of the member details there and the perks and benefits. And if you so decide, you can affiliate with our Kansas City, Missouri chapter. So thank you all again for coming and joining us today. Our guest speaker that we're very excited about is Dr. Irene Soto Marín, who will be speaking about Roman Egypt and its coinage. Dr. Soto Marín is Assistant Curator of Numismatics at the Kelsey Museum of Archaeology and Assistant Professor of Classical Studies at the University of Michigan. Born and raised in Costa Rica, she obtained her BA from Barnard, Columbia University, and her MPhil and PhD from the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World at New York University. She has been working at the site of Amheida in the Dakhleh Oasis of Egypt since 2008. Her research focuses on the economy of Roman and late Roman Egypt. She has published on ceramics, taxes, coin molds, and also edited some papyrological texts. She is currently working on her monograph project, the Egyptian Emporium, the economic integration of a late Roman province. Please use the Q&A function below to ask Dr. Soto Marín your questions. We will have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. I want to give a special thanks to ARCE Missouri board member, Dr. Kate Shepard, for hosting our webinar, and for Missouri S&T for their webinar sponsorship. Without further ado, let's extend a warm ARCE Missouri welcome to Dr. Soto Marín.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for being here on a Saturday afternoon. I am very humbled that you would take time off your weekend to come to this lecture. I'd also like to thank the board of ARCE Missouri for inviting me. This is officially my first Midwestern lecture, and I could not think of a better topic or a better venue and company. The first part of today's talk is meant to be more of an introductory lecture to Roman Egyptian coinage in order to understand its characteristics and major trends. I will then shift to talk about the Kelsey and the coins from the site of Karanis, and how the coins of the Kelsey are crucial for understanding aspects of the nature of the monetary history of Egypt during this period. Beginning with the rule of Augustus in 30 BCE, the coinage of the Roman Empire has been divided into two categories by scholars: Roman Imperial coinage and Roman Provincial coinage. Imperial coinage was produced in Rome and consisted of a trimetallic system of gold, silver, and bronze denominations. Provincial coinage was produced throughout the Roman provinces and consisted of mostly bronze coinages, though gold and silver issues from the provinces are known as well, the latter particularly from Asia Minor. Provincial bronze coinage was produced by hundreds of cities throughout the empire, but after AD 40 only in the east. The coins generally have a portrait of the emperor or a member of his family on the obverse, and a reverse which refers to the city in question, often one of its religious aspects. Throughout the first 350 years of the Roman Empire, civic coinages or provincial coinages played an important role in the eastern provinces of the empire and circulated in tandem with imperial coinages, which were minted in Rome. The Egyptian province is the exception to this trend, however, as it maintained a closed currency system and used different denominations, weight, and even metal for its coinage. It also had only one mint, Alexandria. Before I proceed, I want to pause briefly here to talk about two important scholarly and now online resources for numismatics. The first one is Roman Provincial coinage, which you see to your left, and the other one is Roman Imperial coinage, or online coins of the Roman Empire. Over recent decades, numismatic scholarship focusing on the typology of Roman coinage has produced a generally accepted chronology of the types of coins issued by the Roman Empire, though new ones continue to be found and identified. The multi-volume series of Roman Imperial coinage and Roman Provincial coinage catalog and typologize of coins minted in the Roman Empire, roughly from 30 BCE, as I mentioned, to the fall of the Roman West in 491 CE. These works have become central to the study of the chronology and typology of Roman coins. Each volume deals with a chronological period, which is then divided geographically by mints. Due to the substantial work done through the RIC volumes and ochre, the identification and cataloging of the types of coins found in archaeological excavations and in museums has become much easier, which has fostered and strengthened the field of numismatics overall. Not all cities in the Roman Empire had mints, but the most politically and economically important ones did. Before the reorganization of imperial mints under Aurelian in the 3rd century CE, the minting of Roman coins was done in a semi-autonomous manner in the provinces, meaning that each provincial city with authority to mint was able to control their coinage's imagery, but maintain the regular weights and standard used across the empire. This civic coinage production seems to have abruptly ended between the reigns of Aurelian and Tacitus in the late 3rd century CE, and was finally abolished with the economic and monetary reforms of Diocletian. Each mint would also have numerous officinae, or minting workshops, and issues of coins consistently changed when a new emperor came into power, or when a new large supply of coinage was issued. While some iconographies, especially depictions of the sitting emperor, were employed at multiple mints, the diverse markers of each series, denomination, mint, officinae, year minted, and iconography, meant that there was always a great variety in the typology of coinage and circulation across the empire at any particular moment, even after the end of autonomous coinage. So you can see here, this map is from Roman Provincial coinage, where each provincial mint, or each mint, because you can see, this provincial mint only, that was producing mints that were circulating across the empire. So you can see there was hundreds of them. Now to our province. The earliest coinages of the world were issued in either Lydia or Ionia in Asia Minor in the 7th century BCE. By the mid-6th century BCE, the use of coinage seems to have spread widely throughout the Greek city-states and colonies. There is evidence for the production of Athenian owl coinage in Egypt prior to the conquest of Alexander, as well as gold staters issued by the pharaoh Theos during the 30th dynasty, though it seems this was not any official state attempt to properly implement a monetary system. It was not until the conquest of the Achaemenid territories by Alexander the Great in the late 1st century BCE, however, that the wide use of coinage spread to non-Hellenic regions, including Egypt. Upon Alexander's death in 323 BCE, the territories of the Macedonian kingdom were redistributed among the Diadochoi, his generals who survived the subsequent wars. After a series of wars and continued political unrest between the Diadochoi and their sons that lasted for nearly 50 years following Alexander's death, 3 main Hellenistic kingdoms were established by the early 3rd century BCE: the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, the Seleucid dynasty in Syria and the East, and the Antigonic dynasty in Macedon. The first Ptolemaic coinage was officially introduced in Egypt by Ptolemy I, son of Lagos, soon after Alexander's death in 323 BCE. During the first 2 decades of Ptolemaic rule, Egypt's currency used the same weight standard as Alexander himself and the neighboring states that had emerged from Alexander's kingdom, namely a Nadic standard of 17.2 grams of silver per tetragram, so a drachma of 4.3 grams. Although often at war, the Hellenistic territories in the East traded heavily with each other, and the Egyptian monetary system initially served to support trade with other Hellenistic kingdoms and to pay soldiers in and outside of Egypt, putting a premium on the ease of exchange. Thus, the first series of Ptolemaic coinage resembled those of other Hellenistic kingdoms in weight and even iconography. And here I want to point out to another online resource that you guys can use by the American Numismatic Society. This is Ptolemaic Coins Online. Here I put the website numismatic.org/PCO/. And here you can even search by iconography. So it's a very useful tool to know. In 306 BCE, a fiscal crisis was precipitated by the Ptolemaic defeat at the Battle of Salamis, and the ongoing war against the Antagonists forced Ptolemy I to seek extra revenue for state expenses. Ptolemy decided to recoin the Ptolemaic tetradrachms to the standard of 15.7 grams, that is a reduction of about 8.7%, and all non-Ptolemaic coinage was banned from within the Ptolemaic territories. This presumably meant that foreign merchants seeking to acquire Egyptian goods, notably the much needed grain, were compelled to exchange their Attic standard coinage, which had become the major international currency, for Ptolemaic currency. Because the Ptolemies maintained a close monopoly over some widely traded Egyptian products, the result of this policy was presumably that the Ptolemaic kingdom gained 1.5 grams of silver per coin from monetary exchange, as long as nominal prices remained the same and the two coinages were exchanged as if equivalent. Given the Mediterranean dependence on Egyptian grain and other products, this exchange did not hinder trade and was perhaps even beneficial for the Ptolemies, who managed to maintain a close currency system throughout the duration of their dynasty. There is an important change that takes place during this period that also affects the monetary system during the Roman period of Egypt. Extensive numismatic and metallurgical analysis of Ptolemaic coinage series has proven that during the late 3rd century BCE, the minting authorities under the Ptolemies planned for a transition into a new monetary system in which the role of the bronze coinage was enhanced. The existence of a localized, limited monetary zone also enabled close control of the gold to silver ratio and enhanced the role of coinage in the economy, which continued throughout the Roman period. Accordingly, the conquest of Egypt by Augustus in 30 BCE brought about little change to the monetary system, and throughout the Roman period until the reforms of Diocletian in 297-298 CE, Egyptian currency retained a Greek system of denomination and dating. Coins, namely tetradrachms, continued to be made of vellon with lower denominations in bronze, and were minted only in Alexandria with some exceptions, such as when the minting was conducted in Rome during the Flavian period. Now, just to clarify, this is not an Egyptian tetragram. This is just a coin, a denarius, as you see, that was minted in Rome after the Egyptian province was captured or after Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra VII. The iconography depicted in the coins has attracted the attention of numismatists and art historians alike, and has become a subfield of its own, as the images displayed in coins were often tied to the promotion of local and regional identity on a social, political, and religious level. Alexandrian coinage is the only provincial coinage that provides a complete series of imperial portraits up to the year 296 CE. So we're really talking about a province that is heavily monetarized, something to remember about Egypt. And here I put just the first 15 emperors, I believe, but you can see, you can really follow, we'll start Augustus here. It goes kind of like this. You can really follow the portraits of the emperors in these are all Egyptian tetradrachms. And I want to point out also that, as you can see, the legend is in Greek. It's not in Latin, because these are Greek style coinages. The coinage has been termed Alexandrian coinage in numismatics, and many studies have been undertaken on the reverse types. So I'm showing you just reverse types. So just for reference, when the portrait side is always called an obverse, which are these ones, which has the portrait of the emperor, and these are called the reverse side, so the other side of the coin. And the iconography of which directly alludes to Greco-Egyptian social, political, and religious culture. Before we proceed, I will introduce key characteristics of Alexandrian coinage during the Roman period. First of all, almost all of them carry a Greek numeral, so a Greek letter being used as a number to represent the regnal year of the emperor under whose authority the coin was issued. So here you see, my bad. You can see I saw it over here. This is the sign for year that is derived from demotic, etu sign, and this is a delta meaning year 4. You can see it also over here, sign for etus, alpha, year 1. Sorry, my mouse. And you will just another example, etu sign, beta means year 2. Here's another beta, year 2. The regnal year goes from late August to late August, so roughly August 30th to August 29th. And sometimes the Greek letter is used, such as alpha for year, like I showed you for year 1, or beta for year 2, etc., etc. Or ordinals, numbers written in full, such as deuteru, which means second in Greek, placed next to the demotic sign L or etus, which means year. The mint in Alexandria also had 4 oficinae, and sometimes you can see the marks of the oficina. I don't think I have any coins here. I forgot to put one with the mark of the oficinae. Yeah, I don't have it here, sorry. I'll look it for, you guys can look for it in one of the website, in the Roman Provincial Coinage website. That's easy to find. As for denominations, there were 2 metals: billon, which is silver alloy, also called the base silver often, which was used for tetragrams, and bronze, which was used for smaller denominations. The conversion rate is 1 tetragram equals 4 bronze drachmas, and one bronze drachma equals 6 bronze obols. The obverse of the coins obviously is controlled by the imperial offices in Rome, given that the emperor or his family have to be depicted. However, what is particularly characteristic of Alexandrian coinage is the plurality of reverse types, which are drawn from Greco-Roman and Egyptian history and culture. And here we really see a wonderful cultural syncretism in the signs. I think, as I show you in my opening slide, this is probably one of my favorite Egyptian coinages. We have the personification of the god Nile riding a hippo, and bringing with him some corn and a cornucopia. So, really symbolizing fertility, and hippopotamus is a river horse. So there's really a sense of like the flood of the Nile coming in and bringing fertility to Egyptian territories. We also have here Serapis, which of Greco-Egyptian deity. We have Canopus here being depicted. This is, I think this is also Nilus being depicted. We have grain here. We have an Apis bull. And then we have hippopotamus, which is, for those of you that are into Egyptian religion, is the goddess Taweret. It has an apotropaic symbol, but also just means fertility and wellness. We have here another reclining Nilus. And then I put this coin here because it's Irene, which is my name. So I wanted to highlight that we also have coins with different kind of Greek deities. And of course, a much beloved Egyptian grain. And again, these are just like a sample. There's thousands of these different images. So it's really wonderful to look at the reversal of Alexandrian coinage. The coins minted during the reign of Nero are of note among first century hoards, since they seem to have been used up to 100 years later, showing up in large numbers in hoards of the 2nd century CE. New scholarship on the economic transition between Hellenistic and Roman Egypt has demonstrated that there is no evidence of any attempt to integrate the province monetarily with the rest of the empire, as happened in the province of Asia, for example. Blouin and Burnett have recently concluded that it was only during the time of Nero that there was a potential coordination of the coinage system across the whole empire. During this time, monetary changes were imposed in Rome, in Crete, in Syria, in Cappadocia, and even in Egypt, meant to extract and recover silver for the Roman government. This analysis of the transition between Hellenistic and Roman Egyptian coinage largely falls in line with the picture recently drawn by Andrew Monson regarding the domains of administration, land management and tenure, taxation, and the agricultural economy, in which the Roman conquest seems to not have been as disruptive as has often been supposed. The 2nd century CE marked the height of the Alexandrian means productivity, with particular high output during the reign of Hadrian, so 117 to 138 CE. A quick search on Roman provincial coinage online will show you around 1,400 types of Egyptian coins minted in Alexandria during the reign of Hadrian. During the second half of the reign of Marcus Aurelius, between 161 and 180 CE, however, output declined sharply. The 3rd century CE is a known era of transition for the Roman Empire as well as for Egypt. During the early 3rd century, the monetary system throughout the empire maintained a steadily increasing level of pluralism. So, like I mentioned, the large quantity of civic coinage is being produced. The mint in Rome always retained a monopoly on the ability to strike all 3 metals, gold, silver, and bronze, but a continuously growing number of mints, particularly in Asia Minor, minted their own local bronze coinages. Under the Severans, there were at least 340 mints that produced bronze coins. A dual Greek and Latin denomination system contributed to this pluralism, meaning that the types of coins in circulation, especially at centers of high monetary transactions, were innumerable. During the middle of the 3rd century, a military crisis took place, Marcus Aurelius' Marcomannic wars of the late 2nd century had started a military conflict and mass migration in the northeastern regions of the empire. The Goths arrived at the Black Sea in 238 CE and then entered Thrace. They continuously waged war in Greece and Asia Minor until 267 CE. In the west, the Germans, Alemanni, Jugunti, and the Franks carried out raids on the militarized fronts. And in the east, the Sasanians overthrew the Parthians in 242 and waged war against the Romans from 253 until 260, attempting to dominate the Near East. The high expense and pressure of maintaining the military during these decades caused high political instability. There were at least 26 claimants to the throne between 235 and 284 CE, and naturally had strong and immediate repercussions on the economy of the Roman Empire. The liabilities of the state grew rapidly as it had to maintain an army as well as pay tribute to its former enemies to maintain peace. The increasing deficit left the Roman state with no choice but to manipulate the coinage system by debasing and retariffing the face value, creating a more fiduciary coinage. This means that while the precious metal content of a specific coin decreased, its nominal value, more specifically its power to be exchanged at a fixed rate with gold and silver, remained the same or even increased, in theory backed by the Roman state. Fiduciary coinage is therefore entirely dependent on trust. The silver extracted from the recalled coinage was melted and used for state expenditures, and a new bill on coinage was put into circulation. The users of these coins were not fooled, however, and this trust in the state contributed to the political instability, while the new, weaker coins triggered a loss of confidence that led to price inflation throughout the Roman Empire. The steep debasement of coinage during the second half of the 3rd century caused high nominal inflation as prices of commodities were adjusted to suit the newly minted coin metallic contents. General distrust of the currency was an empire-wide phenomenon during the second half of the 3rd century, and the situation in Egypt was not different. While the province continued to function under a currency system that was closed and hence monetarily separate from the rest of the Roman Empire, its silver and bronze coinages were continuously and sharply debased, just like coinage elsewhere between 238 and 265 CE. Indeed, by the second half of the 3rd century, the quality of the last issues of Alexandrian coinage under its separate currency system had deteriorated to such an extent that the last billion coins produced were heavily reduced in weight and diameter and contained virtually no silver. The nominal value of the coins was guaranteed by the estate, at least in theory, in order to maintain purchasing power. But as long as prices were free to rise, the purchasing power was easily eroded. And here I chose 2 particular coins from the Kelsey's collection that I'm going through right now. And here you can see this is an early 3rd century coin, very shiny, with a high content of, it's bronze, but a high content of precious metal, as you can see. And here it is from, middle of the 3rd century when that was like the beginning of the end starts. And you can see this, they look like lead tokens at this point. There's virtually no precious metal in them. However, this is also one of my favorite coins that I've found because it is a beautiful depiction of Isis that you can see here. And she's wearing kind of this like Greek garment. And I think her boobs just look wonderful. So I really like this coin. We cannot speak of Egyptian monetary history without talking about the evidence gleaned from the papyrological record, which provides important information of transaction and even hints of debasement. For example, P. Oxy 12-14-11, dated to 260 CE, is a copy of a notice by the Strategos Ptolemaios commanding all bankers and traders to accept the newly minted coinage in Egypt. This text shows the extreme suspicion of the new coinage provided by the state had reached a point where bankers no longer accepted the new stratagrams, as they were disinclined to accept the new debased currency in exchange for an older issue with a higher silver content. The Alexandrian tetragrams, however, were reformed in 273 CE, preceding the official imperial reform of 274, when Aurelian's year 5 tetragrams had a 15% reduction in weight. Therefore, the weight reduction of the tetragram in 273 anticipated the reform of Aurelian in 274. And this is particularly important for understanding Egyptian monetary history and how much attention the Roman Empire paid to it, because it seems that they were using the Egyptian mint as a trial mint for the rest of the Roman Empire. In order to stabilize the economy of the empire and to assert himself as a new leader after civil unrest and war, Aurelian implemented a monetary reform that included measures to cap inflation and reorganization of the empire's mints. He severely punished the mint of Rome for filling the empire's economic channels with extremely debased coinage, and thus provoking mistrust in the authority of Rome, in what is known as the War of the Moneyers. The mint in Rome was closed for 2 years, and the responsible moneyers sent to the other mints around the empire. Rome reopened the mint in 273, and in 274, Aurelian's new coinage, the so-called Aurelianus, was introduced in Milan. The reform sought to reestablish a trimetallic coinage system of bronze, silver, and gold. The latter two metals were struck to the same standard used under Caracalla, so decades earlier. The bronze units of sestertii, dupondi, and asses, however, were only recreated in the mint of Rome, being merely a homage to a monetary tradition. Their utility in the system was essentially cosmetic. So again, this is more of a homage just to reestablish trust in the system that had existed in the first 2 centuries of Roman rule. Aurelian also reorganized the imperial mints, instituting 8 official mints and 39 officinae, along with a clearer and more systematic method of marking mints on coins. The marking of bronze coinage has actually been recognized as one of the main merits of his reform. The reform of Aurelian had regional disparities and was not applied uniformly throughout the empire. Aurelian managed to recall the base Antoniniani, which is the coin that was issued decades earlier by Caracalla, in order to make way for his new coinage in the economic channels of the empire. However, the results in the western part of the empire were not very successful. Aurelian's reformed coinage was rapidly debased by his successors, and even the gold aureos fell subject to a weight reduction. Nonetheless, Aurelian's reform was somewhat effective in removing the heavily debased coinages issued by his predecessors, and it was these newly instituted measures and systems that Diocletian completed and systematized. However, following the expected reactions in the market and on the part of the users of the coins, prices rose about tenfold, at this time in Egypt specifically, reflecting more accurately the purchasing power of the Billion coinage. Starting in 284 CE, Diocletian instituted monetary reforms throughout the empire. Diocletian's currency reform expanded the previous system instituted by Aurelian in the 270s, whose coinage reform had limited durability. The coinage had been heavily debased by the time of Diocletian, since it had been affected by the policies instituted by Diocletian's predecessors. One of Diocletian's aims was to create a more balanced and efficient political unit. To that end, he needed to streamline tax collection around the empire in order to maintain his new, larger political machine and his presumably larger army. The taxation reforms of Diocletian are naturally closely tied to his coinage reforms. But the changes on taxation, which received much scholarly attention in the 1990s, cannot be dealt with right now. In conjunction with other reforms, he abolished Egypt's closed currency system and instituted a new coinage reform throughout all of the empire. For over 600 years, the Egyptian territory had required currency exchange at its borders for the purchase of goods, which allowed very close control of the metal supply and the minting schedule, as well as the extraction of coinage within the province. This also, however, separated Egypt in some respects from the rest of the empire, giving it a partially isolated economic status relative to the rest of the provinces, a characteristic that strongly challenged Diocletian's political ideal of a well-integrated empire. After 296, all of the empire, including Egypt, had a gold solidus, a silver argenteus, and 3 denominations of bronze coinages. And thus, for the first time, Egypt utilized the same coinage as the rest of the Mediterranean world, and Roman Egyptian coinage ceased to be made. Now for this second part of the lecture, once I've given you this overview, very rapid overview of Egyptian monetary history, I wish to show you some highlights of the numismatic collection at the Kelsey and explain why the coins in the museum are essential for our understanding of Egypt's monetary history during the Roman period. Firstly, a brief introduction to the museum itself, which has been my home these last few months. The museum was a brainchild of Francis Kelsey, who was professor of Latin at the University of Michigan from 1889 to 1927. The museum's collection contains 100,000 objects, most of them coming from excavations in Egypt and Iraq, carried out in the 1920s and 1930s. Francis Kelsey passed away in 1928, and the Museum of Classical Archaeology was founded in Newberry Hall. The museum was renamed in 1953 in honor of Kelsey and enlarged in 2009 with the new Abjom wing. The museum is currently the home of IPCA, the Interdepartmental Program in Classical Art and Archaeology, and has also been actively sponsoring excavation projects for almost 100 years. Originally in search for papyri, the University of Michigan started excavations under the direction of Francis Kelsey in 1924 until 1935. During this time, prior to the 1970s UNESCO convention, excavations in Egypt functioned under a system of partage, in which the objects found were divided between the Egyptian Museum in Cairo and the excavating institution. It is under these laws that several thousand objects from the site of Karanis, forming half of the museum's collection, came to the Kelsey. So as you can see, I just put some stats on how many objects we have from Karanis in the Kelsey. We have almost half of that 100,000 objects, about 5,200 archival photos, 4 hours of actual motion picture, maps, notebooks, unpublished manuscripts. About 44% of the museum's archival holdings. And in addition to this, we also have the papyri, which are housed in the papyrological collection of the Human Library, which contains 168 finds, consisting of papyri and wax tablets. Among the almost 47,000 artifacts, 27,000 coins entered the Kelsey Museum. 2,049 were found on a single specimen, but the rest are found in 38 hoards. Of the 38, 24 hoards were found in a single complex of buildings. So yeah, and these coins were published in 1964 by Hadben and Pedersen. And this was kind of like the first major overview of Karanis coins. Coins from Karanis had been published before by J.G. Milne, but this was the first proper catalog that was published. Now, a little bit about the coin collection at the Kelsey. The Kelsey coin collection has over 40,000 coins. As I mentioned, 27,000 of these come from Karanis, which means that since the museum itself has 100,000 objects, coins from Karanis represent over 1/4 of the total holdings of the museum. Theodore Pottery, who left Michigan in the early 1980s, and the other coins come from the excavation of Seleucia and the Tigris. There's several thousand that comes from different collections of donors that have been given to us. But as you can see, the majority of the coins come from an excavated context. Theodore Pottery, who left Michigan in the early 1980s, was the last dedicated curator of numismatics in the Kelsey. And he published an important hoard of Athenian imitation owls from Egypt, which is the one I mentioned in my introductory talk. So this is how important the Kelsey's coinage is to understanding Egyptian monetary history. Coins from Karanis have long been at the center of the Roman Egyptian monetary history. To this date, 38 hoards have been found in Karanis, as I mentioned, which were published already in 1964 by Hadben and Pedersen. The evidence from Karanis represents over 1/3 of the total numismatic material we have from Roman Egypt, and they form the foundation for Eric Christiansen's important 2004 book, Coinage in Roman Egypt, the Hoard Evidence. We have both single finds and hoards from Karanis, though it is the hoards that have been given more scholarly attention in the past. The hoard evidence from Karanis is unique. Not only is it the site in Egypt with the most coins from the Roman period, but even within the site itself, most of the coins come from one house, House C401B501, called the House of the Banker, which you can see over here. You can see cores 14 to 36 were found in just one house. There is not enough time left to go over the specifics of the coins that were found in the basement, though it suffices to say that they span from the 1st century CE to the late 3rd century. The 1st century coins I'm mentioning are actually the ones from the reign of Nero, who, if you remember correctly, I actually mentioned that they stay in circulation for over 100 years. In fact, a large number of the coins from Karanis date to the 3rd century CE, and they represent the majority of the collection in the Kelsey. The hoards from Karanis also raised an important question for understanding the relationship of the monetary systems between Egypt and the Roman Empire. Hoard 4 from Karanis, containing 60 Roman aurei, was found in a courtyard of B11, another house, a 2nd century house at the site. The hoard had originally been stored in a cloth bag, whose only remnants were traces of mesh weave left in the soil around it. Some textile remains from a cloth bag were found nearby, possibly part of the original bag that held the coins. 22 coins were retained by the Department of Antiquities in Cairo, dating to the Antoninus Pius, Marcus Aurelius, Faustina the Elder, and 3 of Faustina the Younger. The remaining 38 coins now in the Kelsey Museum, which you see on display here, are all dated to the 4th consulship of Antoninus Pius, so precisely between 156 and 157 CE. leading Hadvin and Pedersen to conclude that this is when the hoard was concealed, so middle of the 2nd century. We possess interesting documentation about the discovery of the hoard, such as this telegram sent from Francis Kelsey in Egypt to UN President Clarence Cook Little. While the finding of any hoard in a secure archaeological context is of course a cause of celebration, this particular hoard is interesting because it is one of the very few examples of the use of aurae in Egypt. We know that throughout the Roman period, Egypt remained a separate currency zone, meaning that only Egyptian coinage was officially minted and circulated in the province. So what were these aurae doing at Karanis? As the aureus is part of the traditional Roman monetary system, it was not part of the Egyptian Greek system of denominations still in place during this time. Using precisely this evidence, however, Eric Christensen demonstrated the hoarding and active use of denarii and aurae in Egypt during the Roman period. Whether gold coins circulated freely in Egypt or not is still contested. Christensen himself has hypothesized that perhaps these gold coinages were meant to be used eventually in the active Indo-Roman trade and sub-Saharan trade which flowed through Egypt. Further numismatic evidence from Karanis, which is this one I mentioned before, shows that the close connection Egyptian tetragrams had with Roman denarii, such as the empire-wide reforms of Nero, which affected the Egyptian province, and later on in 275, the introduction of the Aureliani, which, as I mentioned, had been anticipated by the Alexandrian Mint with a weight reduction already in 274. I am not suggesting that Diocletian's reform at the end of the 3rd century was just a formality, but I am suggesting that monetary boundaries are fluid, and that it was perhaps only through the opening of the currency system that an interconnection between Egypt and the Mediterranean was actually visible. If possible, a closer assessment of 3rd century and pre-reform hoards may reveal the degree of permeability of the monetary horizon of Egypt's closed currency system during the Roman period. A reassessment of the Karanis coins contextualized with other archaeological and archival data can also further shed light into these questions. And now I'd like to take these last 5 minutes of the lecture just to talk a little bit about what kind of projects and initiatives I have been starting at the Kelsey since I have arrived. The first is that we're going to create a proper numismatic database that will house all of the coins. We have started the photographic project. We've ordered special equipment that will be helping us with photographing and cataloging the whole collection. This will take several years, however, so it's better to start now. And in addition to this, we're also starting with the digitization of archival material, particularly from Karanis, because I think the main thing to do now, the coins have been published and studied by a lot of numismatists, but they've never been super closely associated with the archival material, which talks about the archaeological context. So it's my hope that through the digitization of the archival material, we can better contextualize the hoards through stratigraphic levels, and also better contextualize them in relation to other objects, since we know some coins were found next to papyri, next to pottery. So really see coins as, not as isolated objects. And then these are all coins from the Kelsey, from the Ptolemaic period. And there's another project that I will eventually start to, it's my first year. We also have a lot of surface finds from Karanis, which are very corroded. The coins were already corroded when they entered the museum. They were found on the surface of the site, and they haven't been cleaned and they haven't been analyzed. Of course, they lack an archaeological context, so the kind of questions we can answer from them are very limited. But I do think I looked at a lot of these myself. There's some 3rd century coins that are expected, but given the weight of some of these, I think there's a lot of earlier 1st and 2nd century tetragrams as well that are always useful to have around, since they're for teaching purposes and other kinds of pedagogical purposes. And also just to add to the number of coins that we have specific types. Well, that's it for me from now. So thank you very much for your time, and I welcome any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, this is my blog. Sorry, I also started a blog. Is here. Sorry, I forgot about that.
No, don't be sorry. You've got to put that up there. If you could actually keep that up there while you do some Q&A, if that would be all right.
Yeah, that was my last slide. I forgot to mention.
Excellent. We've got a lot of questions already, which is so fun. Okay, so what I'll do is if you ask questions, instead of raising your hand, Khaled, Ismail, I see your hand up, but I won't I won't call on you to actually speak. So if you just type in the Q&A, I'll be able to see it. So please do that. So I'm going to go basically in order of the questions that people asked. So Brandon Green said, asks, you distinguish between locally controlled reverses and centrally determined obverses. Yet many of the obverse portraits differ greatly from official types, and the inscriptions are in Greek. How much control did Rome really exert over Egyptian provincial obverses?
That's a great question. So there was autonomy. They were autonomous, so that they had to, of course, use a portrait of the emperor that looked like the emperor. They can't just use something else. But the official portrait had to be approved by the central offices in Rome. So it wasn't as if they were just free to do whatever they wanted. Remember that Egypt was a very close controlled province. So often, like, for example, the prefect of Egypt was one of the highest offices you could have in the Roman Empire. There was a lot of control over the taxation of it, the annona, as well, the grain supply that was going to Rome. So the decisions were made more like they had to be approved. So you could design your own portrait, or it had to match the portrait of the emperor. The legend had to be in Greek, but you see the legend is actually nothing too exciting, Autokratos or something like this from the name of the emperor. But then the imperial offices in Rome, or the official mint in Rome, had to still approve the design.
Excellent, thank you. Lisa Haney asks, of all the coins you have seen, do you have a favorite? I love that question.
Of the coins in Karanis, in the Kelsey, yes, my favorite is the one I showed you of Isis. That's why I put it up there. Of the coins of Rome and Egypt, so before Diocletian, is the first one I used in my slide, with the Nile right in the hippopotamus. No, I think I find the iconography wonderful, and the level of religious syncretism is really outstanding. I mean, if you think of as a Roman coin, because it's being issued by a Roman emperor in authority, with a Greek system of denomination and a Greek legend, and Egyptian deities being depicted. So more social and cultural syncretism I haven't seen in coinage before. So it's really, that's why I really like the Egyptian coinage.
And I just have to say, I love that you have different categories of favorites. That's great. So we have an anonymous question. Hello, Dr. Irene. Thank you for your amazing informative lecture. I'm working on the iconography of the chariots in coins in Greco-Roman Egypt. I found Ptolemaic examples, but I found rare examples from the Roman period. Have you seen or studied any of these types of coins?
Yes, there are. I really suggest you look at the Roman Provincial coinage. If you go under advanced search and go in, it has a field that says reverse, just type quadriga. That's what they call the chariot. So Q, I don't know if I can, sorry, Q, I was trying to type it better. Quadriga, quadriga.
Tell me how to do it again.
Quadriga. You'll find a bunch of quadriga reverse types, which are chariots. The emperor, like, well, I don't know. Yeah, it will be chariots because it's 4 horses, so there you can see them. But they're particularly popular, if I recall, during the reign of Hadrian, which has like a bunch of types, and the reign of Nero. So if you want to look at Egyptian coinage for a particular typology, always start with those 2 emperors, because they're the ones that issued the most number of coins. So you have better chances of finding an image, a reverse image of a particular type.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. Let's see, another question from Lisa Haney. Does your work at Amheida relate to coinage as well?
No, not at all. Not even a little bit. No, that's not true. Now I've started implementing, we have another person working on the coins, and I've started implementing the Amheida coins into my coin database that I have. So I should say I focus on I'm a late Roman person, so I focus on like post-Diocletian period. And actually, I started working on Amheida before I even knew what coins were. So my first I knew what coins were, but like ancient coins. So my first introduction to the ancient world materials on our site was actually working as a ceramicist, which I have to say has proved to be useful, because if you know anything about late antique coinage is that it's just very mass produced and very boring compared to the coins I've shown you today. So I think a life in ceramics or a career in ceramics prepares you to look at late antique coinage. On and on.
Excellent. Okay, so Khaled Ismail has asked, the papyrus of accepting the imperial coinage is very interesting. In which reign of which emperor was this papyrus written, if you know?
Okay, I do know because I happened to be editing a papyrus from the same year. So it's 260. So this is a contested year. So we start into the year where 261, for example, we have Aemilianus, which was the prefect of Egypt, kind of like declaring himself emperor, which is essentially he's been recognized as an usurper. But in 260, we have Quietus and Macrianus, who were the 260, 261 are Quietus and Macrianus. And for particular reasons, these two emperors, they only ruled for 1 year. So it's quite easy to actually date these papyri. There's surprisingly a lot of texts mentioning them, the two of them, given the fact that they ruled for such a short time. And I think it has to do with some of taxation reassessment they wanted to do of the province. So one of the papyri I'm editing right now actually is it seems to be some kind of imperial letter written by the high offices of the prefect when they're trying to reassess or get some extras, get some hard numbers for the Oxyrhynchite known, to try to do some kind of tax extraction. I still haven't figured out, it's very fragmentary. But yes, Quietus and Macrianus, who are the emperors.
Excellent. Okay, from Almawat Bella El Shahawi. Thanks so much for the fascinating presentation. I saw some coinage from Kuranis in your presentation that need the conservation process. Have you done any treatment or conservation projects for these coins, or are the museum planning to do treatment processes on them at all?
We have, I just arrived in September to the Kelsey. So I've been already like, I've keeping busy with plans, but yeah, it is in our plans to restore the coins. I've been talking to the conservators. Eventually we need to apply to a grant though, because the number of coins that need conservation are in the hundreds. So we would need like a game plan to conserve all of these. What I have done though is I've gone through all of the ones that need conservation, and they're all more or less stable, which means that they can stay a few more years like this. If I see something like a very advanced bronze disease, I've already sent it to the conservator's lab. But the way the coins are stored at the Kelsey is actually quite good, and the level of humidity is very low in the storage area, so they're very stable. Even if they need conservation, and anything that has bronze disease that I've been able to identify has been already consulted with conservators. The last dedicated curator of numismatics, the Kelsey, was Pottery, who left in the 1980s. So it's about 4 decades since someone was like looking at every single coin in the museum, or dedicated to look at the collection, because we also have other very delicate objects. We have baskets, we have textiles. So a lot of these actually require, I would say, much more attention in conservation than the coins. And the coins are okay, they're stable. But there are plans to apply for grants and conserve them.
Excellent, that's good. Good news. From Julianne Schroeder, thank you for this interesting talk. Are you aware of any textual sources on how and why and or by whom certain motifs were chosen for coins, especially since the Egyptian coins are separate from the Roman imperial coins?
That's a good question. For textual, I can't think of any, but I have to be fair, I haven't focused too much on iconography in my own research. So I haven't looked too much into it. I would recommend that you look into major books on Roman Egyptian coinage. Like, do I have it here? No, I have it in my other. Coinage in Roman Egypt, the one I mentioned. Look at the bibliography, because that book was very thorough, and you'll find some things. I'm trying to think. You could also check the database of the American Numismatic Society. It has a very active library database. I think it's called DONUM, DONUM. And you just type iconography Egypt Roman, it'll show every article and every book that mentions that. So that's a really good, useful numismatic resource.
Thank you, that's great. We have time, we're gonna do 3 more questions, just so people know. And what I will do is I will share the other questions with Irene. So she may be able to message you back, or maybe she'll do, no pressure, Irene, but maybe she'll do like a blog post on answering some of these questions. Just an idea. But I don't want to overwhelm you with questions. So we'll do 3 more. Ann Austin asks, could you share additional examples of texts that discuss distrust of the currency as the quality of the currency decreased? How did individual people respond when they were worried about the falling value of the currency?
So this is a project of mine that I wanna endeavor more with papyrological sources. So the best ones are gonna be from the 3rd century, because that's where, like, first we have a lot of texts from that century. 3rd and 4th century in general, we have a lot of texts. And also is when the first half of the 4th century and the 3rd century is when the coinage is the most disaster. I can't think of anything particularly as direct as these bankers not accepting, but we do have notices in the early 4th century, for example, where the government is forcing landowners, wealthy landowners, to, it's called a compulsory purchase, a coemptione in late antiquity, which is basically the government comes and says, hey, I know you have this amount of wealth, I know you have this amount of gold bullion, I force you as a form of taxation to sell your gold and silver bullion to me under this rate. This was meant because they just didn't have precious metal to mint coins. And we have other evidence of how crappy the coins were. There were a lot of coin molds, so they weren't being minted by the official mint in Alexandria. The government just didn't have precious metal, so they were running to the wealthy citizens and asking for the metal bullion. So textual sources, we have papyri more or less, and archaeological sources as well that point to a distrust in the bronze coins that were being issued by the Egyptian mint.
Excellent. Sarah Orell asks, can you talk a bit about the dating of the pottery by the use of the coinage? She adds, my understanding is that they don't agree that the pottery seems to be substantially later than it would be if dated strictly by the coinage. Is this a case of circulation of coinage continuing for a significant period of time?
So the short answer to that, I mean, which I assume pottery in general, I think it's like general pottery, not specific. It is generally understood that ceramics have a very wide chronology. So even if you're lucky, if you find some sigillata or some red African slip, maybe you can date it within 30 and 40 years. So that itself is even like iffy. Coins, however, you have to know specifically the history of that issue of coins, because there's issues of coins that only we know stay in circulation very short because there's a coinage reform that happens right after. So there, it gives you like a good dating. Other coins, like the one I mentioned of Nero, stay in circulation even 100 years after. So you find them in Horse for the 2nd century. So I would say that you have to know the history of the coin itself to be able to date. What usually the coin will give you a terminus post quem, for sure. And that's the only thing that it can give you. But an antiquem, I don't know. I mean, for example, we also have solidi that were minted in the 360 CE that stay in circulation until the 5th century. So you have to know the history of particular coinages very well before you use one coin to date a whole stratigraphic unit.
That makes sense. Okay, last question, and then we will close out. But before I ask it, I do just want to thank everybody for your amazing questions. Stacy is going to give us a little bit of a conclusion after Irene is done answering the questions. So Alan Kendall asks, in Ptolemaic coinage, we see images of the queens, either with the king or by themselves. In the Roman coinage, do we see similar images of Roman empresses or just the emperor?
Yes, it's very common. We even see in the reign of Nero, we see Agrippina, we see Augustus with Livia. We see, my favorite though is Julia Domna in the early 3rd century, because she was like, she was a bit crazy, but you know, she was quite controlling. She was able to have a lot of power. She was the mother of Caracalla. But yeah, it's very common to have Roman empresses as well being depicted on coinage, and Roman mothers as well, mothers of emperors.
Oh, nice.
Daughters, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I am going to hand it over to Stacy as I reshare my screen. Okay. Are we still there?
Yes,
Oh, good.
I am here. Yes, if you could forward.
Oh, yeah, I
one slide.
apologize.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was a fascinating presentation. It's certainly an area that I know a lot of us did not have any instruction in. So it's really amazing that you could come and bring that knowledge to us. And I think we're all left with more questions at this point. So hopefully we'll keep researching this era and these coins. So thank you again. And to all of our attendees, hopefully you also found this presentation fascinating and has opened up some new avenues of exploration in your own personal research and interests. And if you're interested in marking your calendar now, we have an announcement for our March presenters. On the 27th of March at the same time, so 4 p.m. Central Time, we will be hosting Dr. Sarah Skellinger and Ms. Mimi Levesque for From Storage to Showcase, Conserving Ancient Egyptian Animal Mummies. So spread the word if you're into mummies, if you're into animals, into conservation and archaeology, this will be the presentation for you. So again, thank you for spending some of your Saturday with us, wherever you are, and take care, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for that questions. They were great also.
Bye, everyone.